throughout this session to type in questions regarding technical issues or presentation content. The Q&A tab is located at the top of your screen. Once you open the tab, in order to type in a question, place your cursor in the smaller box on the top. Type the question and click Ask. Please note that your anonymity is protected and no names will appear in the question box. If you prefer that your questions be answered privately, please specify this in the text box. Dr. Knight, Dr. Holly Patterson, and Ms. Roderick Landwald will pause at the end of the session to read questions and provide answers. Please note that the webinar software only allows you to type in one question unless your previous question has already been answered. We are pleased to have our event captioned in live time by a captioner who is joining us online today. You might have noticed that a special box popped up on your screen when you first entered the session. That is where you will be able to access the real-time captioning transcript. You were prompted to enter your name and organization so that the captioner will have that information. We encourage you to resize the captioning window to a size that suits your needs. You may also move it to a more convenient location by clicking on the top of the box and dragging it with your mouse. If you do not prefer to view the captioning, please feel free to close out the window and it will disappear from your view. A quick note about the audio portion of the session. We will be recording this event so that it can be available online later for those who missed it today. In order to produce the best quality recording, we have muted all the phone lines to minimize background noise. So if you have a comment or question, please use the Q&A answer tab. We are fortunate to have Dr. Jim Knight as well as Dr. Holly Patterson and Ms. Amber Roderick Landwald with us today. Dr. Knight is a research associate at the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning. Since 1999, he has been the director of Gear Up Pathways to Success, a comprehensive district-wide school reform project in Topeka, Kansas. Jim has spent more than a decade studying instructional coaching and writing several books on the topic. His articles on instructional coaching have been included in publications such as the Journal of Staff Development, Principal Leadership, School Administrator, and Teachers Teaching Teachers. Jim has also been featured in 2 DVD instructional programs on instructional coaching and leads the Coaching Institute's an annual instructional coaching conference offered by the University of Kansas. He has also won several University Teaching Innovation and Service Awards. Dr. Holly Peterson is the Director of Secondary Instruction and Innovation in the Canyon School District in Utah, and Amber Roderick Landward is the Director of Elementary Instruction and Innovation in the Canyons School District. They will be sharing their experiences in using coaching with RTI initiatives. We are very fortunate. All 3 of them are sharing their experiences with us today. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Knight.
Thanks very much. What I'll be doing is giving a brief overview of instructional coaching, and then we'll hear from Holly and Amber about how that coaching model is manifested or transformed to support RTI and their work in Utah. And I just want to give you a pretty clear picture, as best I can in 40 minutes or so, on what it looks like to do coaching and why we need that. And I'll be trying to answer 3 simple questions. First one is, what is an instructional coach? When I answer that question, it's not my goal to say that you should adopt my definition. I just want to let you know that as I use that terminology, what's the word mean when I use it? You may have a whole different kind of definition. Second thing is, what do coaches do? What are sort of the nuts and bolts of being a coach? We can only do a brief little overview of that, but I do want to kind of sort of lay out what it is that a coach does, and then talk a bit about some of the research we've conducted. I've been involved in working on how do you get implementation of high-quality teaching practices for more than a decade, actually since about 1992, and out of that has come coaching and ongoing work on what we need to have in the school. So I'm going to kind of work this through and try to include a few anecdotes. My usual style is to speak a little bit and then interact a little bit, but that won't work with this webinar procedure. So sit back and take a coffee or three, and I'll work my way through this material and try to give you answers to all three of these questions. First thing is, what is instructional coaching? What do we mean by an instructional coach? And again, this is my definition. It's not necessarily one that you would adopt. But for us, an instructional coach is kind of like a professional developer on steroids. What they do is they work with teachers to help them identify and assist with implementation of proven teaching methods. In any kind of RTI initiative, you're going to want teachers to learn new practices so they can better meet the needs of students that have any range of instructional and learning needs. And so what the instructional coach does is help teachers learn those practices. If you look at the slide, on-site doesn't mean that the coach is a full-time person in one school, but it means they have a relationship with the people they work with. They're not a stranger talking to strangers. The teachers they work with, they know about their families. They know their child just made the soccer team. They know that their mother just had an operation on their hip, and they're friends with the people they work with, or at least colleagues, not strangers talking to strangers. The word partnership, as will become clear, is really key. It's a teacher talking to a teacher. I have interviewed more than 300 educators across Canada and the United States, and all the time they tell me in those interviews that they learn most of their good ideas from other teachers. So when we went about creating instructional coaching, we said, let's put someone in the school who's like a teacher, working with teachers, sharing ideas. Then there are procedures they follow to identify and assist with the implementation of proven teaching methods. That is, they have a repertoire of teaching practices that will make a difference, and the tools of RTI will really help with the identification and assisting part of the whole process. But simply put, an instructional coach is a person who has a repertoire of proven practices, and they use best instructional practices to help teachers implement those tools effectively and in ways that make a difference for kids. Now, there are 5 big ideas I want to talk about just to set the stage, and then we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of what coaches do and the research. The first big idea is the distinction that Robert Hargraves makes between what he calls push coaching and pull coaching. Now let's look at the push coaching. Incidentally, I wouldn't want to be those 2 farmers that are pushing on the elephant there trying to get it through the door. But the concept of push coaching is the idea that as a coach, my job is to try to persuade the person with whom I'm working to do something that I think is best for them. I might show up and say, you should try this content enhancement routine, this way of teaching concepts. It's going to really help all your students grasp these concepts. And would you please try it? And it's almost like I want to have you do a favor for me by implementing this particular practice. I'm trying to push this practice onto you. The concept of pull coaching is that the teacher and I sit together and we talk about what they want to focus on and where they want to go, and we establish some kind of goal that the teacher wants to accomplish. And then as a coach, my job is to help you accomplish your goal. Jim Collins says, a good goal isn't just a smart goal, but it's one that hits you in the gut. It's one that really matters. And we are increasingly using video as a way to get at this by videotaping a teacher, sharing the video, and having the teacher talk about what they'd like to work on. We might ask a question like, how close is this to your ideal class, to where you want the class to be, and what can we do to help you accomplish that goal? Second big idea is the idea of what I call informed adaptive response. And I'm sure you can see all kinds of parallels with RTI as I work through this. It's kind of an awkward phrase, but it's the best I can come up with. The idea of informed adaptive response is that in any given situation, the coach has to adapt the way in which they work with the teacher to help her support her students or help him support his students. No one practice is going to work the same in every situation. No approach to coaching, no particular teaching practice. Every group of students is unique. Every student needs some kind of individualized attention as best as can be accomplished. So the coach has to adapt their responses. There's no one way to accomplish everything. But the more knowledge the coach has about best teaching practices, about communication skills, about leadership tactics, and about human motivation, and about the needs of students. The more the teacher knows, the more informed they are, the coach knows, the more informed the coach is, the better they're able to adapt their response to the individual needs of the students and the teacher. An idea of adaptive response comes from Heifetz's book on adaptive leadership, but it's the real idea that you have to really know your stuff so that you can uniquely tailor it to the needs of the teacher and the student. Third big idea is the idea that that informed adaptive response, that adaptability is best manifested in a partnership. Edgar Schein has a new book that came out last year, I think. And in the book, he talks about helping. In fact, that's the title of the book. And he says that helping relationships can sort of be structured around three ideas. Is it a child, parent, or an adult kind of role? And what we want in coaching, for a number of reasons, is we want an adult-to-adult conversation. We don't want to structure it as a parent to child, where I'm telling you what to do and holding you accountable. We want it as two adults, professionals, thinking together, working together, engaged in dialogue, and there's choice and there's equality embedded in the nature of the relationship. The fourth concept, the fourth big idea, is the idea of relationships. Not much can happen in coaching unless there's a relationship there in place, and so coaches have to be highly skilled at their communication skills. That idea of partnership says a lot about the nature of the relationships, because when I'm in a partnership with someone else, I don't make decisions for them. What I do is I set up opportunities for us to think together. It's not my job to tell my colleague what they should do and how they should think. It's my job to provide awesome support to help them implement proven practices. And so for that to happen, coaches really need to be skillful at relationship building, at being a witness to the good in the classroom, at listening carefully and asking questions. Simple thing like how you pose a question can make a big difference in strengthening or damaging a relationship. Kathy Toll, who's a colleague of mine, probably the nation's leading expert on questioning, she said that she never likes to ask a question that she thinks she knows the answer to. And she never likes to ask a question unless she's genuinely curious about what the answer is. That simple thing, that's that kind of communication skill, can move things forward because you're letting the other person know that their knowledge, their expertise, what they have to say really counts. I'm not manipulating you with my questions. I'm really asking good questions. Same thing with listening. Listening is one way to really accelerate communication and relationships, because you're saying, your words matter so much to me that I'm going to get my words out of the situation and focus on what you have to say. Well, the last idea with respect to this is that all of this professional learning rarely takes place unless we're actually in the classroom making it happen. Conducting workshops and expecting them to lead to significant change in professional learning is a little bit like teaching people how to swim without ever getting in the classroom. Now, I remember my son works in the third world, and he was in a school where they were teaching kids keyboarding, and nobody actually had computers. They just drew a little keyboard on the desk. And clearly, that's less than ideal. You want to learn about learning in the classroom where it really matters. I have this experience I have all the time of going to airports and trying to get on a plane, and before I get on the plane, I park my car, and when I park my car, I look at where it's parked, and I'll see the little number where it says it is. It says, well, okay, it's B22. And in the moment when I park my car, I'm dead certain when I come back, I'll know exactly where the car is. And then I get on my plane and I go off, and I come back a few days later, and I've completely forgotten where I parked the car. In the moment when I parked it, I was absolutely certain. But when I come back, I've completely forgotten. And that's the same thing that happens, I think, in workshops. In a workshop, a teacher has good intentions about implementing. They like the ideas. They make a lot of sense. They're all about putting them into practice. But then when they get back in the classroom, within a week or two, they've pretty much forgotten what they learned, no matter how good it is. And so coaching is necessary to sit down with the teacher and say, let's really make this happen. What do we need to do here? How do we put this in place? And so a focus on experience is key, not to mention the fact that most persuasion starts with experience. The book, The Influencer by Patterson and his colleagues, really lays out that if you want people to change, it has to start with an experience that changes what they're thinking and what they do. So those are some big ideas behind this business of what coaches do, and now I sort of want to walk through the process of what coaches do as we work it out. Now, this is a very quick overview. We can't go into much detail, but I will say this. It is much more difficult to change the way someone teaches or to provide support to enable them to implement practices than we genuinely assume it is. And we've watched a lot of tape of teachers in the classroom, and it takes a lot of support to really make significant changes in teaching practice. I don't think it's the teacher's fault that they don't implement practices they hear in workshops. It's just not realistic to expect them to do it. It's naive to assume we could tell somebody something and have them go and implement it. We need a coach to help them translate those practices, mediate them, and help them work in the classroom. So we have these components of coaching that we go through, and the first, let me go back to the list here. How do we get people on board? How do we identify what to do? What's involved in explaining what we're learning? How do we model it? How do we observe and explore what we observed? And how do we refine the practices? And I'll spend a little bit of time on each of these things. The first thing is that often in schools, teachers don't have high expectations for professional learning. And in order to enroll teachers, you may need to meet them one-to-one. You may need to have brief conversations. They may be referred in a way that really respects their choices to work with you. But you're going to have to really work through communicating in a way that the teachers understand what it is you have to offer, and that it's something it's not meant to be more. It's taking stuff off their plate so that they can work with you. One of our favorite ways to enroll people in coaching is to conduct one-to-one interviews. And if I talk about them, maybe it'll clarify some of the other ways. We found that when you meet with a group of people and you don't meet them one-to-one, there's a danger that they won't see you as, it sounds silly, but as a real person. Martin Buber talked about how we turn people into objects and don't see them as being real. And it's in the one-to-one conversation with a person, that initial one-to-one conversation where we explain what coaching is all about, and maybe we have a one-page summary of what we do, that we're able to help people see what coaching has to offer. We believe one of the quickest ways to accelerate coaching is to have one-to-one interviews, brief conversations where we explain the information. And in that conversation, in 15 minutes, the people we work with realize that we really are real people, and then they can really connect with us. Most teachers have had the experience of having a student who's just a problem in the classroom, who seems to be, for lack of better terms, almost nasty, just not a good kid that you really enjoy teaching. And then you meet that student one-to-one, and in the one-to-one conversation, you're able to make a connection with them that sometimes translates into a much better year. Now, with teachers, it's not that they're negative or hostile or anything like that, but they don't see you as real until you sit down and have the one-to-one conversation. So one way of enrolling teachers is by sitting down, having a brief conversation, laying out what you could do, how you can help, and during that conversation to really listen to the teachers and understand their perspective. There are many other ways you can do this as well, and there's an article I wrote for teachers teaching teachers that you can get on the coaching website that talks about other ways to enroll people in coaching. Once you've enrolled someone in coaching, the next step is to identify what you have to do. And for us, this is increasingly about identifying something that really matters to the teacher. Now, we use a framework called the Big Four that looks at classroom management, content planning, instruction, and assessment for learning. But others could use other kinds of teaching practices that are proven practices that help you respond to the needs of the students. That happens to be our framework. But what we are increasingly doing is using flip cameras when the teachers want us to videotape the class, videotape the students, and share that recording with the teacher so they can identify where they'd like to start. Their goal might be one related to behavior. Their goal might be one related to questioning techniques or the use of formative assessment. But we want, as Jim Collins says, we want a goal that really hits them in the gut. It's one that really matters to them. They say, I really wish my kids were more engaged in conversation. I really wish my kids were less disruptive. I really wish I praised kids more than I do. I did a count that I only praised them this much. I want to get it up to this. And so in the identification phase, what we try to do is match up all the tools we've got to help the teachers with what they identify as the goal that really matters to them. And it's important that it's a goal that matters to them because, in your own life, the goals that count are rarely the goals that other people give you. What matters is the goal that you identify as being significant to you. Well, once we've identified what to focus on, then the next part is to focus on explaining that process. And the slides I just went through talk about the high leverage practices we might use. But in explaining that practice, let's say we're explaining how to do effective questioning, we feel the explanations need to be precise but provisional. So let's say we used a checklist as a tool to help a person learn a particular practice. We would want to go through that checklist and be very precise. But then the provisional part is we say, now you tell me how that would work for your students. Do we need to adjust this to make this tool work for you? There's a lot of talk about fidelity, and there's no doubt that there's good reasons for that. People want high-quality implementation. They want kids to get practices that are done effectively so they make a difference. But blind fidelity isn't nearly as appropriate and effective as practices that have been tailored to fit the needs of the students. I don't want, as Lucy West says, I don't want mindless fidelity, but I want this high-quality implementation. So I'm very, very clear on my explanations, but I'm also open to adapting the practice to make it fit the needs of the individual students and the teaching style of the teacher. Precise but provisional explanations. Well, after we explain a practice, what we usually do is we ask the teacher if they'd like us to model it for them in their classroom with their students. Our experience has been that if you just grab a teacher in the hall and you say, would you like me to do a model lesson, they're going to say, not really. Everything's cool. But if we're learning a particular practice from start to finish, all the way through, then and we've explained it and it is helping a teacher achieve a goal they want and they have a clear explanation, they almost always want us to give a model demonstration. In our interviews, teachers have told us again and again and again that modeling is really key. Now, we don't necessarily model for the entire period. We might only model for 15 minutes. If we're teaching about advanced organizers, we might only do the 5-minute advanced organizer. But we model and the teacher watches us, and if there's some kind of checklist, they might fill in the checklist as they observe us. After we model for the teacher, then we observe the teacher. And increasingly we're using video, both to videotape our model lessons and to videotape the teacher. And we go in and we observe, we gather data on what happens in the classroom. And then we sit down with the teacher and we explore the data with them. When we use video, we show the video of the class to the teacher. We ask the teacher to watch it on her own, identify the parts that she thinks she's proud of, and identify areas where she has questions or concerns, and the coach does the same thing, looks for things that went extremely well, looks for areas of conversation. And then we use effective questioning techniques to dig out what worked well and where we want to move forward and how close we are now to the goal we're trying to accomplish. Last part of the coaching process is to refine the practices. And to refine the practices, we sometimes do more explanation, we sometimes do more modeling, we sometimes do more observation and feedback. It depends on the students, depends on the teacher, it depends on what the practice is itself. But we keep going until we get high quality implementation of the practice. That's the goal of what we do for coaching. So that's a super fast version of our instructional coaching model, but I'd like to say a little bit about what the research we've conducted about coaching, just so you have a context for that, and then I'll turn it over to Holly and Amber. All of these research studies are available online at instructionalcoach.org/research. In fact, if you just Google instructional coach, the first website that comes up is the coach.org website, and you can just click on the research link. One of the first studies we did was on this whole business of partnership. And partnership is the idea of approaching teachers as adults, respecting the humanity of the education of the person, and providing people with choices, with voice, engaging them in dialogue, and really working with teachers in equal conversation. In the study in partnership, we conducted 2 different workshops, and we compared the results when we took a partnership approach versus a traditional approach, and We looked at was there more engagement, was there more interest in implementation, did people learn more in one or the other workshop, and the results for the partnership workshop were resoundingly positive. The big thing that said was the nature of the way you approach people makes a big difference. Our second study that's in the research section looks at interviews we've conducted with teachers about coaching, and there's a quick summary online about that. And what we found in the interviews was, again and again and again, teachers told us that modeling was critical. To watch somebody else do it for you before you do it was really helpful for teachers when they're going to learn practices. Well, we know that in the classroom. We know how important modeling is when we work with students, so it's not surprising it's helpful to teachers. I have a little quotation here from one of the interviews, and it just sort of captures what we hear frequently in those sessions. This teacher was talking about a coach who was helping her use what's called the unit organizer, kind of a graphic organizer for a unit, and here's what she said. Talking about the coach, the teacher says, the coach came in and modeled it after I tried the unit organizer once, and it was funny because I could see the look on the kids' faces. It was as if they were saying, this is so not what you had us do. So I was like, okay, I'm learning too. And it was wonderful because she could bounce off math things to me that needed discussion as we did it, and I could bounce off the organizational stuff to her. And the kids got the big picture. And then the teacher goes on to say, and this is really important, I think, I could never have gotten that if it hadn't been modeled for me. I never could have gotten it. I would have failed miserably at it and given it up because even when she and I just talked about it, I thought, next year, if we don't have to do this, I'm not going to do it because I can't see any benefit to it because I don't know how to use it. But then when I saw her, that was just like, wow. I looked for the light on in the kids' eyes, and when Lynn came in and modeled it for me, oh my God, the light just went on. Now again and again and again, in our interviews with teachers, we heard the same thing. It wasn't until she came in my classroom and showed me how to do it with my kids that I realized I could do it too. Well, we did another study on implementation, and in that study we also used the unit organizer, and let me just show you what the unit organizer looks like. It's a graphic organizer that's kind of a way of conducting an advanced organizer at the start of the class and keeping track of learning as it goes. It was developed by Keith Lentz at the Center for Research on Learning, and he conducted research on it. And if you look at the little map we've got, it has the unit questions. You might call these essential questions or guiding questions or critical questions. There's information on unit relationships, and then there's a schedule of what's going to be covered in the class, and there's a map of the content that's going to be covered. As the unit progresses, the students create an expanded map where they write down all the key information. In this case, it's about areas of the U.S. and differences between the areas related to the Civil War and events and leaders of change. And throughout the unit, this expanded map you're looking at now is built by the students. Well, what we did is we had a workshop where we brought together teachers who wanted to learn this. They weren't forced to go. There were people that our coaches had interviewed who said they wanted to learn the practice. We had a total of, I think, 53 teachers who came to the workshop, and we put their names into a hat. Half of them got coaching, and half of them didn't. And then we followed up. We had graduate research assistants who went into an awful lot of the classes, more than half of the classes, and did observations to see who's implementing and what's the quality of implementation when we had coaching and when we didn't have coaching. So here's what we found when we looked at the data. First thing was, of the people who didn't get coaching, even though this was a group of people who wanted to learn the unit organizer, only 36% had any evidence of implementation at all. This is quite a bit higher than you usually see in the research on implementation, but bear in mind these are people that were interviewed prior to the session who said they wanted to come, and still the difference, 92% to 36%. And this isn't based on people's surveys or self-reporting. These are what did our research assistants see when they went in the classroom. 36% of the time we saw implementation if there wasn't coaching, 92% when there was coaching. Well, then we looked at the quality of implementation, and there's a specific way you're supposed to use the unit organizer to review content at the start, to introduce new information, to add new information on the map, and to end the lesson. The numbers on the left indicate rounded off numbers related to what we saw with respect to quality of implementation. And simply put, the quality of implementation on the red column versus the gray column shows you there was much better implementation when we had coaching. First off, not that many people used it, but those who used it didn't use it particularly effectively because there wasn't coaching. Then we wanted to ask people whether they continue to use it. Now this all happened during the just before assessment. So only 68% of the people who were coached continue to use it. Most of them said they had shifted into teaching in preparation for the assessments, so they weren't going to use the unit organizer. But when we asked them would they continue to use it in the future, 96% of the coach people said yes, and 35% of the non-coach group said yes. So coaching, it seems to me, pretty clearly looks at, or this study at least shows us that when we observe teachers, we had more implementation, better quality implementation. And when we ask teachers whether they're going to continue to use it, you can just see on the charts that there's pretty dramatic difference. If we want to have the practices that students need so that they can really move forward and be taught in a way that's going to be successful for them, I think it's really, really key that without that coaching, it's not likely going to be successful. So that's kind of the stuff I wanted to say. Why don't I turn it over to Holly and Amber, and then after that we can see if there's any questions.
That sounds great. This is Holly.
And this is Amber. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
So our understanding...
Hello?
This is the operator. Her line just disconnected. It'll just be a moment while we reestablish her line.
Maybe I could take a few questions while we wait for them to get back on.
That sounds like a good idea. One question that came in is, what can independent trainers and consultants do to better support the coaching role in districts and schools?
Well, I think one thing that's really, that's a great question, a rich one. One of the things is that I think workshops are still very, very important. But what workshops do is they introduce ideas into a community. They don't lead to dramatic changes. And so if you conceive of a workshop as a way of introducing content rather than ensuring practice, it changes the way you approach it. And if you build into your workshop time for participants at the end of the workshop to plan how they're going to work for the coaches to implement it, it can be really powerful. So you can tell teachers, don't worry about trying to remember all this. I'm just laying it out so you can see the big ideas, so you can see if you like it. And if you like it, we'll have time at the end so you and your coach can get together to talk about how you can make this happen.
We are back.
Sorry.
Hey, great.
Then we will turn it over to you, and we will resume questions later.
Okay,
Right.
sounds good. We wanted to just share a little bit about how we have used coaching for the RTI process, both at the state level and also at our current positions with the district. I think it would be worthwhile to just take a minute and explain how our role has shifted so that when we are talking about the experience space, people can see the two areas we're talking about. So Amber and I used to work for the Utah Personnel Development Center, which was a federally funded agency that served all 41 school districts in the state of Utah. So we did RTI coaching from a systems level with a number of those districts. About 17 of them, I would say, had strong implementation models working through our organization. Last year, our state did something unprecedented for our state, and they had a voter action that split our largest school district in the state into two districts, which created the Canyon School District. And the superintendent in this district, the Canyon School District, really wants to implement RTI system-wide. So he gave us both an offer we couldn't refuse to come over and head up the evidence-based learning office for the Canyon School District. So we went from serving at a state level to now serving a district that has 29 elementary schools, 8 middle schools, and 4 high schools. Is there anything you want to add, Amber?
If we can just walk you through what we did at the state, and we participated in a lot of, Holly probably mentioned this at the beginning,
a lot of GEMS trainings at the state level to be able to support our coaches. So we'd like to just share with you our perspective on what we did at the state and how we took a lot of the instructional coaching principles and broadened them into a systems approach to be able to support the system with effective implementation of response to intervention. And part of the reason why we did that, as you all know, because you're with the RTI Center right now, one of the problems we were having is helping teachers to see beyond their lens. Our teachers, in order for RTI to happen, it has to be a system approach with all hands on deck, and schools can no longer be a loose coupling of independent contractors. So we had to kind of get that system in place before we'll be able to get in and do the individual coaching that Dr. Knight talks about. So that was the first step that we anticipated, is how do we get a systematic support here so that we can build consensus with each of the schools related to the RTI process. And we felt that that was going to give us the sense of urgency to help us build consensus so that those classroom teachers would in effect start seeking support to help them in their classroom as they saw themselves part of the larger system and responsible for all students. So in Utah, we started slowly. We started with 5 school districts that had a district-level coach working with 4 schools. So they weren't as job-embedded as Dr. Knight just talked about, and that's partially because they had a little bit different role. Their role was to work with the school system, meaning the administrator, the itinerant professionals, and the classroom teachers to build consensus for an RTI model. So those coaches participated in a network at the state level where they would consistently work with their schools and then come back to center with the other coaches from the other 5 districts and talk about the challenges that they were seeing related to implementation, and specifically talk about the last 3 things that Dr. Knight talked about: how to form partnerships, how to build those relationships, and how to enhance their experience base, because at the time we didn't have any schools that were doing what I would call an RTI model beyond maybe an individual department. Maybe a special ed department was trying to do some pieces of the RTI model, but as you know, it needs to be a full system model to truly maintain the integrity. From there, we grew as a state to the point that we had 15 school districts participating and over 20 system-level coaches who would meet monthly. Well, the first couple of months they would meet weekly with their schools to check in and sit in on grade-level team meetings and participate in faculty meetings and other systems that the schools had set up for professional learning communities. And they would ask good questions and try to offer resources. The questions that they would focus on with the schools included the following. They would ask questions regarding the core instruction in the school and really looking at an RTI model and asking, is what we're doing for all students sufficient for at least 80% of the students to make progress? They would ask questions such as, for which students is our core sufficient and for which is it not sufficient? And they didn't, like Dr. Knight said, they didn't tell the schools what to do. They more helped them to navigate their data and to ask questions regarding their practice. And then as time progressed with that, each school had developed their own on-site coaching and system-level support structures. So we did that for several years at a state level, and then now we are at a district level, and we've continued a similar model. I'm going to talk briefly about what we've done at the middle school level using the coaching model. So we, all of our middle schools as of this year, have a late start 1 day a week where they do professional learning communities. Those professional learning communities focus on 3 levels of problem solving. They look at problem solving from a horizontal lens, so that would be a grade level. The 7th grade team looks at what they are doing with their scope and sequence, the essential questions, the essential skills, and which students are needing differentiation because they are struggling, and which students are needing differentiation because they are advanced and need some enrichment. They are also looking at a vertical level, so they're meeting to look at, is there alignment from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade? And then finally, they're looking at the course level. So all of the teachers who are teaching, let's say, 7th grade language arts are meeting and following the PLC model to determine if their students are making sufficient progress. Is their course sufficient? And then they're planning their interventions and enrichment around that mechanism that the meeting is creating. At the district level, we have teacher specialists. It's important that I note that they're teacher specialists, not administrators, and they are out at those schools every single time they do their PLC. And they are serving as a support. They really have an attitude of servitude, that they are building those relationships, they are partnering with those schools, and they are experiencing side by side with those teachers the PLC process. You want to talk about what you're doing at the elementary?
Because even though we're a new school district, we inherited all of the schools, the personnel, and the administration that came with those schools. So what was already in place at the elementary level was a reading coach at every single building. But as many of you in schools can probably relate, these individuals were charged with the task to coach teachers, but were not given a model, were not given any of the coaching principles, and were not really given a whole lot of training about how to do that. The principals in the building loved the idea of having the FTE there to support, and these people walked in often charged with the task that many of coaches have been given, and that's to wave the magic wand and make all of the bad things go away. And as you all know that have had experience with coaching, that isn't always easy. So what has happened in the schools where there was less consensus for actual instructional coaching, a lot of our coaches still to this day have been providing individual support to students through intervention groups. So as we became a new school district, we started evolving that model to focus more on what the responsibilities of a coach are, and expanding it beyond, again, instruction to look more at that professional learning community time to be able to support teachers first with data-based decision-making, to again create that urgency that there is actually a need for them to maybe look at their own practices through data and then start supporting them with the effective instructional techniques that we need them to be doing in the class to ensure that their core instruction really has the highest probability of success for the majority of the students. So we've worked with our coaches to really serve in multiple ways, and we like to say it as a systems level coach because they're really supporting the system both with core instruction, with intensive and supplemental interventions as well. So they're working very closely with the leadership team to ensure that we are always looking at the school data as we plan forward, but then they're also taking down to those grade level teams, looking at the grade level data and then individual teachers' data to support them with effective instructional practices in math, reading, and behavior. So it becomes a broad role. What we've also seen, I think, with a model like this, we saw it at the state level, was when we were focusing on the system, it really increased the opportunities for classroom level teachers to share and coach each other on their curriculum expertise, which has again built that sustainability to support effective instruction for all teachers.
So we wanted to answer any questions that others may have, or obviously allow for opportunities for questions to be posed to Dr. Knight.
That would be great. Let me just read some of the questions that have come through.
Could I just jump in for one quick second just to clarify something? Just take a second. That if you want further information, you can go to the website instructionalcoach.org. One of the questions was about other resources. There are tons of tools there for coaches and papers and presentations and the research. And then on the website, the Big Four Ning, which I think is going to pop up here in a second, there's a number of mini coaching manuals you can download that are free and that you can copy and share with other people. And you can join the Ning if you want updates on the research we do and the publications we have and so forth. You don't have to join it, though. You can lurk in the background, but you can get a lot of free information there. And then you can contact me if you have further questions, and then that's my email. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure I shared that information.
Thank you for sharing those resources. I'm sure that they will be very helpful. One of the questions, I believe, for Dr. Knight is, what does the current literature say about effective characteristics of coaches?
I don't know about the literature, but we did a study in Florida, which we haven't published. There aren't a whole lot of really rigorous studies that have been done on the characteristics that I'm aware of that are grounded in empirical research. But we went to Florida where they have 2,600 coaches. 10 of us went down there as researchers, and we went to 5 different sites. We worked with the state to identify some truly outstanding coaches from that pool of 2,600, and we found the kind of things you would expect to see, that the coaches are hard-working people, they're disciplined, they're really skilled communicators, they have knowledge that is useful for the teachers. They see themselves as learners. They're people who just go into the position as a learner. They have credibility in the eyes of the teachers, and we'll be presenting that data in more detail at the American Educational Research Association, and we'll be publishing a paper on that soon. But you know, the outstanding coaches have the characteristics of outstanding employees, great communicators, hardworking, dedicated. One of the principals I interviewed said, when I leave the school, there's only usually one other car in the parking lot, and it's usually that person. But they, again and again and again, the emotional intelligence comes up, the ability to build communication, the ability to build relationships and communicate clearly with a critical skill.
Another question that has come up is the person is interested in seeing learning recommendations for observational tools for instructional coaching. Any recommendations on tools?
Well, we're increasingly using video to record what's happening in the classroom. And there's a book by Atul Gawande. It's about doctors, but it's called The Checklist Manifesto. And he makes a pretty excellent argument for really precise observation tools, constructing precise observation tools. Now, in the Big Four NING, we have many manuals. All of them have little checklists, but the observation tool is related to the particular practice. There's a book that Randy Sprick, Wendy Reinke, Tricia McHale, Lynn Barnes, and I wrote called Coaching Classroom Management. And in that book, we have a lot of behavioral observation tools for looking at things like time on task, praise versus corrections, opportunities to respond. So that's another way to access them too. But if you go online to the NING, you can download quite a few things. And the thing is, when you observe a teacher, if you don't use the video, there's a very good chance the teacher won't recognize what you're saying because they don't really have a clear picture of what's going on. When you watch video, you have this moment of sort of awareness where you go, holy smokes, I had no idea it looked like that. And I videotaped myself in a meeting, and I was just flabbergasted to see the way I communicated compared to what I thought I did. And so something like a little flip camera could be a really powerful tool. We wouldn't do it unless the teacher was with us in the process and was agreeable in choosing to do it, but the camera has really been helpful. And then you tie that together with those tools I talked about.
Another question has come in for Amber and Holly. How do you boil down your experience with RTI and instructional coaching? That's the first question. And the second is, what is the top consideration to use coaching within an RTI framework?
This is Holly. I think the experience, if I could boil it down, it can't skip the consensus building phase. And I think Dr. Knight called it enrollment. But we've learned that you can't throw a coach at a situation without doing the background work to make sure that it's going to have the greatest chance of impacting the activities that go on day to day at that school. And then the second question was?
The second question, I need somebody to show it. Okay. Is,
Sorry.
what is the top consideration to use instructional coaching within an RTI framework?
Oh, I think Amber really hit it on the head. We've made some mistakes along the way, and one of them was not clearly defining the role of the RTI coach and watching them slowly get sucked into providing direct services to students versus modeling and supporting the teacher in providing those services. So I think with the RTI coaching, it's really important that the coach understands their role as a system support and not necessarily a support to individual students or individual teachers.
Another question is for Dr. Knight. Do you have suggestions for handling when a teacher's goals do not match the needs observed by the coach?
Well, first off, yes, I do. First off, I think it's going to be easier for a coach to be successful when everything in the school focuses on a number of practices that everyone's learning. That's why we like something like the Big Four. We can clarify we want to focus on classroom management, content planning, a range of instructional practices, and assessment for learning. We don't see the coach as the person who holds people accountable, so to speak. We see the coach as the person who provides awesome support. So if a teacher, this is maybe going a little further than the question, but if a teacher is not interested in working with the coach, it's not the coach's job to make them do it. It's an administrative job, and it'll be tough to actually be an effective coach if you're in this twin role of being an administrator and also a support. You really want to be in a peer-to-peer relationship whenever possible. That means the principal has a critical goal in fully understanding the practices, observing for the practices, and in a supportive and safe way encouraging people to implement those practices and monitoring what's happening. Second thing is there's a good chance that what the coach sees and what the teacher sees will be different unless you use video and look at the video. And so when you look at the video, it could be different. It's less likely you're going to have that problem. But if you just observe a class and discuss it with the teacher, without the video, it's not likely going to amount to much. The video is going to really help you move forward with the teacher. You have to be careful about assuming that your observations are right, though. I think if we go in assuming that everything we see in the classroom is right without truly listening to the voice of the teachers, we do damage. So one of the ways of building the relationship with the teacher is really trying to understand what they're saying and really listening to them, not seeing our job as coaching to get our teachers to go where we think they need to go, but really seeing ourselves as partners in the process with them and gathering data. The last thing is, I think, as you move forward with teachers, you want to be careful to establish step-by-step goals that start off with something that's easily attainable. Dave Ramsey, who's this financial guru guy, he talks about creating what he calls a debt snowball, where you start with your smallest debt and you end with your biggest debt, and you knock off your first tiny debt, and then your next one, and then your next one, and you build some momentum to get your finances under control. Same thing with coaching. I think you want to establish one small win, and then a next bigger win, and then a next bigger win. So, for example, if you're working with a teacher whose classroom isn't managed particularly well, you might say, let's just get the first 5 minutes under control. If we can do that, then let's see if we can do group learning, and then let's move on and move on and move on. Establish that kind of sort of snowball effect for momentum.
This is Holly. If I could interject, from our perspective with our TI coaches, I think number one is still accurate. Dr. Knight said that it's not an evaluative role and that we want to provide awesome support. The number one thing we work with our coaches on is how to ask guiding questions to help the school staff see the need or urgency required to implement a good RTI system.
I think that's about all the time we have for questions. So I'd like to thank Dr. Knight, Dr. Patterson, and Ms. Roderick Landward for sharing their presentation today. If you'd like to print a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today's presentation, you may do so by clicking on the small printer icon at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. This will allow you to print to PDF. The slides will also be available on the National Center Response to Intervention's website, and that website is www.rti4success.org, and that is the number 4. If you have any additional questions about RTI and instructional coaching, please email them to us at rtiwebinars@air.org. We hope that you will join us for our next webinar, RTI for English Language Learners, Appropriate Screening, Progress Monitoring, and Instructional Planning, presented by Dr. Julie Brown, Dr. Amanda Stanford, and Aaron Lolick on April 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'd appreciate your feedback about today's session. please take a few minutes to complete the webinar evaluation that you see on the screen. We value your feedback, and ultimately your suggestions will assist us in making decisions for our future webinars. Once again, thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the conference call for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your lines. Have a good day.